Welcome to Level Up EQ's panel on the value of feedback. I'm going to be launching a poll right now. The poll is super important because this is a very organic conversation, and your responses to the poll will directly influence how this conversation goes with the panelists. I'm going to jump right into that and introduce our moderator for today, who's Marla Skibbins. Marla is the fearless leader of Level Up EQ. She's a master certified executive coach and a senior faculty member at the Coaches Training Institute. She's been training, coaching, and facilitating for 2 decades over the world, specializing with executive teams in tech and biotech. When she's not rallying our war cry throughout Level Up EQ, you can find her taking walks with her beloveds, rock climbing, and being an awesome human being. So take it away, Marla.
Thank you, Marley. And I really want to thank both you, Marley, and Nicole for making these events happen, because they can't happen without both your love and your masterful attending to detail. So thank you both so much for that. And I want to just underline again, this is a super casual conversation. Our panelists are going to be riffing off one another. Everyone in the panel will be off mute. It's a casual and organic conversation with you and with everyone. So please do put in your questions. And that is a big part of how we create this panel to be for you. And really, people that are not here, which we have hundreds of downloads afterwards, would really appreciate it if you ask your questions, because no doubt they will have the same questions. So please be a part of the conversation. And again, we really want this to be organic and also fun and casual. So so fill out the poll and also ask your questions on the Q&A. And I've been thinking about this. I think about the panels for a few days before they happen. And I have to say, if I think about my own career and I think about those that I work with, really growth starts when we get feedback about our impact. And part of why I feel passionate about the work that I do in the world and about the transformation that Level Up EQ causes with people and organizations is that we get an opportunity to point to and invite, here you go, here's feedback, here's what's working, here's where the growth is. That's how people change. And I just love that we're going to have this conversation. And I feel such gratitude, Meeraa, Michael, and Dena, for being willing to come here on your time and be of service. So thank you for being here and giving of yourselves so that people can get excited about feedback instead of trepidatious, which often they are. So that said, let's launch. And here's what I would love for each of you to introduce yourselves. And as a part of your introduction, I want you to kind of open your behind the scenes and share one thing. And that is, what is one of the most formative pieces of feedback you've ever gotten? So share, because that's really a helpful thing to know. And I will share mine. And I can tell you, I got this feedback 15 years ago. And it is still, the goodness is still happening from that feedback. And the feedback was from one of my colleagues that, since this was young in my career, I'm afraid that I think this might have been 20 years ago. I'm afraid that if I give you feedback, you will go away, like mentally, emotionally go away and never come back again. Now, wow, right? Because I was like, oh my God, but I couldn't go away, right? Because I didn't want to prove him that he was right. And that has been formative all along in my journey of, okay, I'm going to be open and receive, because I don't want to be that leader that goes away and never comes back around the feedback. So there you go. Meeraa, you're on.
Hey, can you hear me okay?
Yes, perfect.
Awesome. First of all, thanks for having me here. When Nicole reached out to me, I mean, this is a topic that is very close to my heart. I said, like, hey, I'm very passionate about this. I'm jumping in right away and sharing what I have learned along the way. So I'm Meeraa Jayaraman. I'm currently part of the Cognizant Technology Solutions, leading the overall L&D for North America geography, and wear many other hats within the organization. Right. And one of the things that I'm proud of is defining the enterprise-wide learning culture for the organization a few years ago. And obviously, feedback was one of the tenets of the learning culture. Right? Like without feedback, we cannot grow. And to your point, Marla, on the earliest feedback that I got, I think I'm also going to go way back 20 years ago when I was just starting my career. And the feedback that I got from my supervisor then was, hey, don't come to me with problems, come to me with solutions, right? So, I mean, I started wondering, hey, if I have a problem, I should go to my supervisor, right? Why should I think about a solution and then go back to him? But then I realized when we come up with solutions, whether it is right or wrong, it matures our thinking, it matures our decision making. It shows that we care about the problem. We are not pushing it off to someone else, right? So I still practice, to your point, it has still stuck with me more than 20 years later as well. And I practice it with my teams, and I push my teams to think through and then come back.
That's great. Thank you. Michael.
Sure. So I'm Mike Gugliotti. I am the global head of sales enablement at Forder. And obviously with sales enablement, there's a lot of feedback that has to be given. We're often doing role plays. We're trying to be constructive with that feedback. And one of the things that I learned very early on, and I'll share that here as my kind of experience, is that it's always important to listen first and react second. It's very easy to hear some feedback and immediately, have a knee-jerk reaction to it. If it's especially if it's negative, or again, and when we think about feedback, it should never be negative. It should be constructive, but we can still take it as negative. So it's always important to listen to all of the feedback first, take it in, and then react to it. And that way, again, you're not just flying off the handle or coming off with an emotional response, but rather trying to understand the bigger picture.
Yeah. Great. Thank you. Dena.
Hi. My name is Dena House. I work for Enablement, the head of HR, OD, organization development and learning for the organization. And one of the things I do is teach a feedback model and try to coach folks, work with them when they need to give feedback to others and or respond to feedback that they received, how to kind of process it. One of my examples is also from like 25 years ago, and it's an example that I use in my workshops all the time. I was super new college grad teaching people how to give feedback, but I found myself that I needed to give one of our executive VPs or GMs some feedback from some behavior in a workshop. And of course, I was super nervous to give him feedback, but I was like, I can't teach the model and not actually hold myself accountable to give the feedback. But I was super upset about what happened, and it was stewing, and I didn't talk to him in the moment. I waited till like 24 hours later to give him the feedback, probably because I also needed to process it. And he was super open to the feedback, but his feedback to me was, Dena, next time in the moment, come talk to me, pull me out of the workshop. Let's have that discussion so that it's not stewing and I can change the behavior in the moment. And to this day, because we had an open dialogue and gave each other feedback, like he is my favorite GM that I've ever worked with, and just built a huge, close relationship with him from that point on.
That's beautiful. Wow, isn't that amazing? And it's so true, right? When someone's available for feedback, it just makes us that much more trusting of the relationship, and it creates a relationship. Thank you for that. Well, let's jump into the questions. And I think before we do anything, let's hear from you all about what is meaningful and productive feedback. Michael, you kind of pointed a little bit, but I'd love to hear each of you share and riff off each other. So please be off mute so you can jump in. Who wants to start?
I'm happy to start with talking about meaningful and productive feedback, because one of the things that I think it always needs to attach to is behaviors and specific examples. And you make a great point about the timeliness of feedback as well, because if you're waiting until days, weeks, months later to give feedback on something, it doesn't really work the same way as when you talk about it in the moment. And this goes back to looking at ways that a lot of companies do feedback models, where they'll do it on a quarterly basis or a sometimes a yearly basis. And when you're doing something only once a year and your manager comes to you and says, hey, all these behaviors weren't really great. It's like, well, why didn't you bring it up sooner? We really should have addressed this at at an earlier time. So I think it's incredibly important to obviously have the specific behaviors, but also match that up with a timely feedback loop. So it doesn't, as you know, borrowing your words, Dena, here, doesn't, you know, kind of sit there and become festering or become a problem that, you know, you're just not addressing in a timely manner.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So good. And I want to say something to that before the two of you jump in. When it's late like that, I think it's so much more likely to create shame, because then the person is like, oh my God, I've been doing that all year and I didn't know, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So, and why people guard, because
Yep.
they're feeling ashamed. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And then it becomes like, you know, if you tie it to a performance review, for example, then it's like a surprise. No performance review should be a surprise. Like, really, you couldn't tell me for 12 months. You had to wait till the very end here, and now I can't do anything about it. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I have read, that 32% of the employees wait for 3 months to receive any feedback. So I think I don't know if it is good compared to the annual model, but again, 3 months is too long a wait. Right?
Yeah.
For me, also feedback has to be definitely timely, immediate, right? Like as and when it happens, specific. And I think it is a lot more receptive when it is interactive as well. Saying, hey, this is what I observed, this is what has happened, how do we go forward from here, right? Like, so make that more of a dialogue than just do it, more prescriptive approach.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually to kind of build on this whole concept of timely feedback, you know, because obviously it's not just about negative feedback or constructive feedback. Sometimes it's positive feedback too, but if you wait to give positive feedback, it can actually diminish the value. You know, if you give negative feedback, it can feel, you know, and you wait a long time to do it, it can feel petty, or it can feel that, you know, someone's trying
Punitive.
to dig up issues. So
Yep.
it's so important on either end, whether it is positive or negative. And then the other side of that is also the way you deliver it matters. So when we look at feedback, from a positive standpoint, it should be done in a public setting if possible. Again, one of the phrases I've heard in the past is shotgun praise, sniper criticism. And the idea is that when it comes to good feedback, give it so that everyone can see it, you know, make that person feel good. And when it is criticism, when it is something that we need to hone in on to change a behavior, you do that in private. You do that during a one-on-one, you do that during review, during the right time. And of course, more than anything else, you ask the person if they're receptive to that feedback as well, because you want to make sure you're starting off that dialogue in a positive manner.
Yeah. Yeah. And I want to add to that, what is meaningful and productive feedback is also, here's what you might do differently next time, or going forward, try this, and be very specific about what could be done differently. Because I watch, like when I give feedback to my clients, they want to change, but because the behavior isn't something they've done before, they need some breadcrumbs. Try this, do this, practice this. And really, the more specific, say 5 sentences, not 20.
Yeah.
Collect your thoughts before you open your mouth. Whatever it is, the more specific it can be, the more actionable the behavior change can be. And then they can go, how'd that go?
Yeah. And also, even for the positive feedback too. And I love, Michael, how you're saying, like, do it in, like, it's almost like you're celebrating the person. Yeah. But I think a lot of times what I hear from, like, especially our newer to the workforce employees or our high potential employees who just want to constantly, like, improve, when you just say you're doing a great job, it's not meaningful to them. And so in exit interviews, a lot of times they'll say, I wish somebody would just tell me, what is it that I'm doing good, so I can keep doing it or keep building on it. So I love how you're saying be specific and clear, even in the positive feedback, so people understand what is it that they should continue doing. Or even can do better, even if it is something positive too, right? Yeah.
Right. And that it hooks in, because good job slides right off somebody's heart and head. Whereas if you said, what I really appreciated about this project you did is you were focused, you were tenacious, and you were going to make it happen. I so felt that. And people can go, oh yeah, that's me. I'll do more of that, so that's great. Anything else you all want to add to that? I know we'll say more about it as we go along.
I think sometimes for the meaningful, also the impact, because sometimes you give the feedback to somebody, but they don't quite understand always the impact. So having that dialogue around, well, why is it important to change that behavior or continue that behavior, the impact it has on others or the organization or perceptions or so forth, just to kind of bring it to life or a visual for them.
That's great. Well, I'm curious in there, there's a question that I'm going to bring forward from our participants. Do you think it's different in terms of in-person versus remote in managing feedback? Because now we're in this world, right? Is there a way you manage it differently to give that productive and meaningful feedback? Is it the same?
I think it's both. I think there are elements that are going to always remain the same. Some things like the structure that you follow and how you give feedback. But I think the way you deliver it needs to be measured a slightly different way, depending on whether or not you even met this person, in the real world before. Because again, just like we misconstrue messages that are texted or emailed, you might misconstrue something that's delivered when it's not in person. And everyone always talks about how emotions are always harder to read via something like Zoom versus being in person. You can't necessarily pick up on mannerisms, or when someone's giving feedback, that person might be shaking their leg or twitching, but you might not see those things on a camera. So it's a little bit harder to be perceptive, which again goes back to why I think it's so important to start the feedback process with getting permission to talk about it first, saying, hey, are you open to some feedback? Here's what I'd like to do, and then ask them to listen, and then ask them for their response too. What do you think about that? Let's explore it more. Because if it's just a one-sided session where you're just laying everything out on them and then walking away, it's not going to be productive.
Yeah. So either of you want to chime in before I ask another question?
Yeah, I think one difference between in-person and the remote aspect is everything becomes a block of 30 minutes, right? Like 30 minutes or 20 minutes. So in person, you can just walk into the cabin or take them out for coffee. And then during the coffee break, tea break, we are able to discuss it and slide in the inputs and then have a productive discussion. It doesn't feel like, hey, I'm being cornered, right? Like now it is, if you have to discuss something, it is a 20-minute block or 30-minute block. That is, I think, we'll have to deal with it, but that's, I think, the big difference now.
Yeah. I'm hearing there's a lack of social aspect and connecting like human to human in that more natural way that we don't have as much. Yeah. And that is a code everyone is trying to crack now.
Yeah. And Meeraa brings up a good point. You can't just, it's a little harder these days to just grab somebody. Hey, hey, you got 5 minutes? I just want to talk to you about something. Because now I got to set some time in your calendar. The title of this is feedback session. It's like, oh boy, what is this about?
Right. So how do you, and we're kind of in this territory, how do you each help leaders overcome fears and the trepidation around feedback?
Preparation. I talk to them around, let's sit down and talk through the feedback. Don't just launch into it and just jump into somebody's office or call somebody, but especially if it's really difficult feedback, like let's prepare it, let's talk through it, let's take the emotion out of it and be very clear, what is it that we're trying to change or reinforce? And then even I have them practice too and prepare for like what could be potential reactions the person might have, so we prepare. And I tell having a little bit of nerves isn't a bad thing. That means that they care, but to go into it like fully raged and emotional or launching into 100 things like isn't going to be productive for either one of them.
Yeah, we teach a model of how to give feedback, and then we also kind of take another step deeper to talk about how to have difficult conversations. So the standard feedback model is really tell me, show me, observe it, and then give feedback again, to see if behaviors have changed. And if they have not, address why. But then the difficult conversations piece is a whole other beast, because, especially in the sales world, maybe you're talking about someone not being productive or, doing or taking place in some kind of behavior, whether it's, unethical behavior or behavior where it doesn't reflect the company well, and you want to have that behavior changed. Or, in the worst case scenario, sometimes it's letting someone know, hey, things aren't working out. We're going to have to let you go. In those scenarios, you want to make sure that you have certain elements taken care of, like having data. Data is going to be huge when you actually go and try to give those specific examples of what's working and what's not. Providing actionable feedback, as we've already discussed a little bit, not just saying, hey, do something different, but rather saying, here's what you should do, here's what we expect, and this is what we're going to be monitoring over the course of X amount of time. And also owning your own part of the problem, because let's be honest, sometimes the problem starts with the manager themselves. We're all capable of making mistakes. We're all, someone who at times, can be the at least not a source of the problem, but at least someone who's maybe not addressing it in a similar fashion or addressing it in the right way. So it's also important for us to acknowledge, hey, maybe I missed this. Maybe there's something I'm doing that I need to change. So if there is, let me know that too. And, kind of working both sides of it.
Yeah.
I think one other thing, great points there, right? Like one other thing is for me to be clear on why I'm giving this input, right? Like, is it for, again, taking the you out of it, focusing on the task, focusing on what has happened and not on the person, right? Like combining those two both. Is it for maybe moving the speed of the delivery, or is it for making something better so that as a team we can come together? So being clear on why and why something has to happen. I think that will also help the receiver to be a lot more receptive of the input.
Yeah. I love that. I love it.
Too.
Kind of the starting with why Simon Sinek piece, because it can get people enrolled in why are we doing this? It isn't just you're mean or I'm bad or whatever stuff that goes on in people's heads. The other thing I'd love to add that I find very effective in giving feedback is you've each said it in your own way where you're setting the context for feedback for somebody. But I also ask, who do you want to be in regards to feedback? Or what is your best self when you interact with feedback? And then how do you choose to be in this conversation around feedback that you may not like? How do you want to be? And then how can I support you in being that person if you do get derailed or you get triggered in some way? Now that's very coach-like, but I think leaders need to be thinking in those ways about how do I be more coach-like with my direct reports, is really helping them know who they want to be. Just like Meeraa, you're talking about why are we doing this? And then how do you want to be given the feedback? Because then we can share, okay, are you getting triggered? And that's the other thing. I invite them, tell me how I'll know you're having a hard time with this, or I'll clam up, or I'll look down, or what they, for whatever self-awareness they have. It helps them both see who they want to be around the matter of feedback, and then you can support them in being their best self in it, so I would add that to the conversation here. So, okay, I'm gonna grab Marley for a second, my fearless leader around the polling. Do you have polling questions you want to share out before we ask the next question?
Yeah, no. So I think this is actually going to move really organically into the next question. So 2 of our poll questions are around how and why and when we deliver feedback. So one of them being, my coworkers would say that I either go out of my way to frequently praise and recognize. I only recognize when I see truly exceptional performance. And there is a 50-50 split on that, on where people land, where they only give feedback if they see something truly exceptional, or they go out of their way to frequently do it. And then we had another one that was similar, which is it's more natural or habitual for me to either identify something done incorrectly or wrong, or recognize something done correctly or well done, and another 50-50 split.
Interesting.
So this is pulling in the question, how do we create a feedback loop of giving and receiving in an organization, knowing that we have folks who will either go out of their way, or folks who will only do it when it's exceptional, or folks who only do it when it's wrong, or folks who will only do it when it's right.
Yeah, how do you dance with that when we've got that split?
Yeah. Well, some of the ways that we work on it at our, it's like we talk about like how do you build it into whatever your process or your project is. So it's not like at the end or at the end of the year or whatever, but it's part of a like when we teach workshops, like stopping and checking in, what's working, what's not working, what can we do better, or if you're doing a project. So then it's not always as you're learning about the person, but it's about also, it could be about the project, it could be a way to get practicing, but that's how we're trying to build it in, is it's not an afterthought, but it's part of our processes.
Absolutely. So for us also, the focus is on continuous improvement, right? Like focus is not just on the feedback aspect of it. So every team meeting, we tend to focus on, hey, what did we learn today, or what did we learn this week? And whom do you want to appreciate? So I think to Mike's point of not feedback being the negative alone, what do we want to recognize as a good behavior? And from that behavior also we learn from many aspects, right? So that is something as part of the process we try to inculcate. And of course, the reflection meetings that happen at the end of project and other things. But then it's as much as we build into the process of how we behave things. And then there is a systematic approach as well, right? Like I think most of the organizations now are moving away from the annual appraisal. And then maybe the appraisal cycle could be annual, but then the feedback is a lot more quarterly, or the check-ins happen a lot more frequent. The systemic support is also needed for an organization across to inculcate that culture.
I'll also add here that, again, like part of being a good coach, if you will, I use the term coach because I myself, I only have one direct report, but I actually interact with a lot of people and give a lot of feedback in my role. So I do see myself as a coach. And one of the things I always try to be mindful of is how to meet people where they are and understand what their needs are. Because sometimes people don't need a lot of praise or don't actually want a lot of praise. And the same thing goes for people who want feedback or, really crave feedback, whether it's constructive or anything else, because they always want continuous improvement. And they feel if they're not getting that kind of feedback, then maybe they're doing something wrong. Maybe they're not growing. So it's trying to understand what those individuals need. And that's, again, I think part of the way you kind of get past that, like not giving enough or giving too little, or I'm sorry, giving too much, giving too little. So that's a little bit of a challenge there, I think, too, is just understanding what those individual needs are, whether it's from your direct team or from those around you.
Yeah, right.
One of the things we also talk, oh, sorry, Marla.
No, you
talk about that kind of builds off that too, is like, people don't know what they don't know. So if you're not sharing and giving that information, like how can somebody improve, or how do they know if something they're doing is working or not working? So we try to talk about that too in our when we're talking about giving and receiving feedback and building it into our culture and having that feedback loop. Otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, I know we're talking about this and we've said it. There is a fragility though around, I mean, when we come down to it, there's this part of us that's afraid I'm not doing well and I'm going to get fired. I mean, I know we have a different kind of job market right now, but ultimately there's this shame factor that happens around feedback. And there's a fragility of ego for a lot of people. And I would say even and often VP, C-level, it's like, oh, I'm done now. I don't need feedback. And I'm just curious how you help your organization at that level be a feedback culture, or how do you hire towards people being willing to give feedback? And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I'll start off by saying, again, from an organizational standpoint, most organizations I've been at, that most they'll do, biannual feedback loops, whether they call it 360s or whatever else. But in my own experience, I found it's important to even just have one structure around one-on-ones to make sure that the one-on-one does not just turn into another, for sales, like deal review, or for non-sales things, just a project update, but rather, how is that person doing? Walk me through some of the things that you're happy about, your achievements, things you're struggling with, where I can help, to make that more of a productive conversation. And then I also personally run a quarterly performance review that is unofficial. It's not HR run. It's just for me and my team. And the idea behind it is we talk about things that, and we each fill it out individually for that same person. But the idea is, what would you want to start doing? What do you want to stop doing? What do you want to continue doing in the next quarter? Also talk about quarterly achievements. And then finally, what does your role look like a year from now? Where do you see yourself going forward? And the reason behind that is not just because it's good to have a system of record, which it absolutely is. We do so much every day. It's sometimes hard to remember what happened in the last 6 months when you're filling out one of those surveys and saying, oh, here's the things I'm proud of. Here are the things I learned to improve on. But it's also showing that I want to continue to invest in this person. Yeah. I see them progressing in this way, and I want to know how they plan on progressing so we can help meet them in the middle and create that path for them.
Go. There's so much of stigma around the word feedback, right? Because it is being seen as something only negative. Only when something negative happens, we are having the feedback given. I think the word has become so much tainted with that negative coloring. What people tend to miss looking out is that it is a tool for learning, right? Like it is a medium for growth. I think the more we talk about it as what we are is more of how each of us can improve, how we can go from here where we want to go. I think that's what we also try to demonstrate, right? Like as leaders, we are open, we are putting ourselves out there, being vulnerable, saying, hey, how can I improve? So what input that do you have for me? So when we start with that point of view, I think that it becomes easy for the teams also to start sharing. And so for me, it is, I mean, for us in the organization, what we are doing is like how I demonstrate, how I enable, and then how I role model, right? Like, so how I am putting myself out there, or how the leaders are putting out themselves out there.
Yeah,
absolutely. Meeraa, I mean, you make a great point, because it's supposed to be a two-way street, as we, kind of already said before, if it's only you delivering feedback and never taking feedback, that's an unfair relationship. It's not balanced. You need that balance. And sometimes the balance starts by saying, hey, start with me, give me the feedback you have for me. Where can I be better? Because I know I can improve. I know there's things I may be missing. So let's start there, and then we'll get to you. And I think that sometimes will open up the pathway a little bit more, because they'll feel a bit more comfortable about delivering that feedback, and then hopefully receiving the feedback that you have for them.
I love that, Michael. And I'm curious for all of you, okay, that's a great concept. But what I watch is there's the power differential, especially if this person reports to you. So how do you create a safe and brave environment for that person to dare to say, Michael, when you do XYZ, that really shuts down the space, or when you do this, the team feels, blah, blah, blah. How do you create that safety? And I'd love to hear from each of you to give that feedback to power, because really, if you have a direct report, you have that higher firepower. So
I'd say it starts with self-awareness. I mean, we all probably can pick one quality of ourselves that we know is maybe not the best quality. Like, and I'm just going to kind of throw random things out here. But maybe you're someone who's perpetually late for meetings. Maybe you're bad at responding to emails. That's actually one of mine. I'm really bad at responding to emails. It takes me like days. But like, if there's something about that, you could say, hey, like, for instance, I'll get things started here. I know I'm not great about responding to emails. Has that become a problem for you? And if so, how can I help improve that? And that way, again, you're kind of just showing your hand a bit, knowing, hey, I'm not perfect. I know I have problems, and I want to hear about them, because the only way I get better is if you tell me.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I'll add that. And then I want to hear from both of you, Meeraa and Dena. I think it was the CEO of Symantec, I might be wrong. He would get a literal written 360 regularly during the year. And then he would take it and send a soft copy to everyone in the organization about him, and then he'd post it on his door, so in written form and paper, so that people could see it. So it's like, hello, here I am, here are all my faults, please read them, keep me accountable. But it's inspiring, right? Because then you go, okay, I have safety in discussing that. So what would each of you add around this?
On a similar note, Marla, right? Like, so what I constantly do is like, I encourage someone who has feedback, and then I share it back in the team saying, hey, I received this and this is how I acted upon it, right? Like, so that people also are able to see that we are receptive to the feedback and we are acting upon it. So I constantly, whenever I can, I share those instances and encourage people to open up, because they see, okay, my team member has given another feedback to the manager, and then she has taken it positively. Then I think I'm also okay to say it out. That's how I think I interweave in the conversations.
Yeah. And are you literally saying the leader calls themselves out publicly and says, hey, I got this feedback and I'm really grateful, and here's what I'm trying to do better, or just correcting the behavior in the moment, or both?
Both.
Yeah. So great. Dena.
Yeah, I kind of am thinking about it from like a cultural standpoint too of the organization. Sometimes you have to look at the culture. So just coming in and saying, let's all give feedback, the culture might not be ready for it, right? And so what other things do we have to build in to the organization? So, some dialogue, getting to know each other, especially if it's a new organization where everybody's just coming together. So a lot of things that we did at Enablement is really having the leaders or managers and teams get to know each other first, because then you build that relationship and it's a little bit easier to give that feedback.
Yeah, you're talking about psychological safety, right?
Yeah, because it wasn't safe at the very beginning, like 3 years ago, but we had to build that trust first. And then now we're like super open to like giving the 360 feedbacks or having those one-on-ones. You have some groups that are more comfortable than others. And I love how you all are saying, like, if you get a 360, don't hide the data. Like go back and say, thank you for giving me feedback. And then here's what I heard, and here's, what I plan on doing, or, clarify if I misunderstood your feedback or whatever, having this conversation. So
yeah, I often have my clients will go, I don't understand this feedback. I don't understand what it is. And I always encourage them, great, you don't understand. Pick a subset of your direct reports and your peers and go, hey, I got this feedback. I don't quite understand it. Could you help me figure out what this means? What might this mean? And so they're getting all the goodness of being public about it, but then they're also getting the help from the system and what might the system be meaning about it. So I really love what you're saying. So I have a question that often what I do with my clients, and we do all kinds of different feedback loops to help clients get feedback around, they've said, I'm going to change, and now I'm getting feedback from the system. Are they seeing me change? But often I'm saying, okay, next week, go get feedback, go find out. I'm going to talk less in meetings, and pick somebody that you're going to warn, please watch me in this meeting. I'm practicing X. How did I do? Now, it's weird for both the getter and the giver to have such a real-time moment, but yet it's so powerful. And I'm wondering, have you tried that? Do you have best practices or, tools you could share with the folks listening about, well, how do you do that? Like I'm going for feedback versus, oh, I'm the giver of it and I need to give you feedback, but someone's literally going, hey, give me feedback. Here's what I want you to watch. So any thoughts on that?
I guess I'll say this goes beyond the business world. My wife and I have a kind of a give and take when it comes to feedback. Let's be honest, when it comes to your partners, you always have feedback there as well, and the way you communicate. And I'm someone, this might not come as a surprise, I like to talk a lot. And sometimes I will talk, or as she says, like talk something to death. And so I've let her know that when that scenario happens, it's okay to say, hey, I get it. Please stop, and so I'm not going to take offense to that, because I know it's a behavior that I'm not always aware of, but she can call me out on it. And whether, again, that happens in a social setting or just between the two of us, that's okay. We've already set the ground rules we've talked about in the past. And I think that is a big piece about when you're giving feedback to someone, whether, again, it's at work or otherwise. If you've talked about these things in the past, you've set up these ground rules, you've set up these expectations, then usually it'll be fine. If you don't set that up and you just start, jumping in the middle of a meeting, and just correcting someone or stopping someone, that's going to be met with a lot of ill intent or, a lot of negative feelings. So it's all about, kind of setting up the ground rules initially.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, another way that we sometimes help folks that are like trying to get input, haven't been able to build that, they call them you can call them whatever you want, but like a focus group, like let's get folks together and say, hey, this is a topic, I want to get some input from you. And so, have somebody say, hey, let's all sit down and chat and get your input about how I'm doing here or what's going on, or in a small team meeting setting. One of the agenda items, I want to talk about how things are going here, or how you all are doing and feeling about how things are going. So that could be a way to like open things up to start building in a culture of feedback or giving input to each other, being open to giving input before that one-on-one if it's too difficult.
I love the focus group. Here's a feedback focus group for Dena, or whatever, but it normalizes it. And then, oh gosh, I want one of those, and then it starts it up like that. I love that. Yeah. So great. So I have, this is kind of embedded in everything we are saying. It is, what do we do about the leaders and the folks that are anti-feedback, resistant to feedback? I kind of started that question, which was, what do we do when, the C-level is anti-feedback or resistant to feedback? But what do you do when you hit that wall?
I think that starts with the question of why.
Yeah.
Why are you against feedback, or why is it when we try to give feedback, you don't react in a way that's welcoming to it? And how can we potentially get past that? Because it's proven that when you have a culture of feedback, everyone thrives. But it also is proven that it starts at the top. And if the top can't receive feedback, whether it's anonymous feedback through like a question box, or direct feedback during a review, then how are we supposed to have a culture of feedback? Because again, we are supposed to be setting the examples as leaders. So that's where I would start, is just trying to understand the why behind it.
And a lot of times those folks always, even when you give them the feedback, then they have an excuse for it too, or they try to, have a reason for it or why it's not correct and stuff. And try to also get to perceptions. Like, okay, let's take it out of maybe if it's a truth or not, but this is how people are perceiving you, and what's the impact of this perception, whether it's real or not. I'm not going to judge that part of it. I just want to talk about, this is what folks are saying, and how can we be open to understanding that and maybe changing some of the perceptions, and then tying it back to the impact, to their being successful. I think exactly what you're saying, Michael, to their being successful as a leader. Like, this is going to impact them if folks are having these perceptions and not able to thrive in their organization.
Yeah, I love that, because it's what I think the thing that I say with my clients. I get that wasn't your intention, but intention isn't the point. It's what your impact is, regardless of your intention, and your impact on the system is X, or the impact on this person is Y. And is that the impact you want to have?
Right. Mm-hmm.
And if you're going for that impact, well, then we need to talk about that.
Exactly.
If you weren't, we need to talk about that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then I think you do need to pull in, like, if it's just one executive, or is it your whole executive team? And then what is the culture you want to change on that executive team? It's the whole team. If it's just one, where do you get the support from, hopefully your top leader, that this is the culture I want from my executive committee, that we're open to feedback and we're learning and we're growing and we're developing. So you do have to pull the whole team in at some point, not pointing anybody out, but at least having it part of the executive team's commitment to the organization.
Yeah. Which then hopefully will model, so that people will see, either this isn't the right place for me because I'm resistant to feedback and this culture is not going to support me, or, oh, okay, I guess I can align around this because the why is there. It's about us being great, or it's about us, whatever our purpose is. Yeah, that's great. I'm seeing questions are being asked, and I'm going to ask, but Meeraa, do you have anything you want to add to what we're saying?
Just one point extending that is, sometimes what I have seen is the tools, the assessment tools seem to do the trick, right? Like, instead of you and me telling the thing, you say, hey, go through this self-assessment tool, and then see the communicate it through those results, right? Like, if it is something, a behavior, a consistent behavior change, or the personality aspect of it, that does the trick sometimes.
I love that. So now here's more of it, like the technicalities of feedback. And maybe another way to think about this is, what's your best in show in terms of, or best practices around, what's the best way to gather feedback, and what is the best way to deliver feedback that is most successful, like if the literal technicalities for you. Or another way to think about it is, hey, the best ways or the tools I use are, because people are listening going, well, how do I do this? How do I actually change my culture? How do I invite, induce, support feedback? And systems are crucial in how we do that. So anyone want to jump into that one?
So I'll say, from the feedback standpoint, on like a more annual or quarterly or whatever basis, I do very much like the start, stop, continue model, because I think it collects a lot of good information. It focuses on both things that are good, things that maybe need improvement. And again, that's a great organized approach, but that's not always the time or the right way to do it. I think it just depends on, is it feedback that needs to be given because it's a behavior that needs immediate changing? Is it, again, praise that we want to deliver in a timely manner so someone doesn't feel like we're just overlooking their accomplishments? Or is it something that can hold off until one of those annualized versions? So that's the first thing I'll say, is that in an ideal setting, we're following a structure because we know that person is going to be receptive, because, hey, that's like kind of what we do. Now, again, having the right environment for it matters as well. So whether that is a one-on-one, whether it's a team meeting where, again, it's kind of agreed upon that, we'll give feedback as an open team together, or if it's something, completely different, we have to be aware of that as well. Because we said we want to make sure we're meeting individuals where they are. And if we're doing something in an environment they're not comfortable with, it's only going to be met with criticism, or at least negative feelings towards it. And I'm actually going to try to hit on Sean's question here as well, about what to do when you see feedback that was agreed upon, but the behavior doesn't change. And how do you revisit that? Well, now you have a written document if you are following those structured versions. So you can come back to it, and it doesn't have to be the next quarter or the next biannual review. It could be during a one-on-one. It could be earlier on and say, hey, I want to check in and see what progress we made here. And if there isn't progress, ask why. What's keeping you from being able to do that? And how can I help you make those changes? Because at the end of the day, we both want to see you succeed, but I can't do it for you. I need you to meet me halfway. So what is it that's missing, and how can we fill that?
And I want to add to that, because I think sometimes a couple of things happen. One, people actually don't understand how to change. They don't understand what's the mechanism. They think they're changing because they're thinking about it, but actually they don't know what to do to change. And I think it's important to be able to help when we're giving feedback, to give that the breadcrumbs. So that's the example. So when you're in this team meeting, what I notice is you take over and you just are a bull, and you've got, and you're going and nobody can get in. Here's what I want you to practice. And I want you to try it 3 times in the next meeting, that you say one thing and then you ask, what do you all think? And then I'm going to watch, and then we're going to see how that went. So you give people breadcrumbs, that they're triggered in a certain environment, and you can help them practice in that environment. Because I think often people think they're changing just because it's more aware, they're more aware of it, but the behavior hasn't caught up yet.
Well, you're hitting on a good point there, Marla, about when someone is triggered, usually there's an action, and then there's what we can call a payoff, reward, or whatever the case. And what you're asking them to do is, once you have that trigger, change the behavior that happens in between, and hopefully reach that same payoff, that same reward.
Right.
And again, some behaviors are easy to change. If someone who's perpetually late and they have to get up 10 minutes earlier for work, like, okay, that's not so hard, like maybe that's all that is just a slight tweak to behavior. But if you're asking for someone to completely change the way they interact with another person, or the way they act in meetings, the way they're conducting a project, that's going to be harder for them. And it's also something that this goes back to Sean's point as well, about what do you do when you're not seeing behaviors and changing. It's about consistently going back and revisiting it, because usually a change in behavior doesn't happen overnight. It takes a lot of time.
A long time.
And so that's a big piece of it as well. It's not just about saying it once and going, okay, great, we're not going to have to worry about that again.
Right.
More than likely, you're going to continuously have this conversation. And hopefully each time you can point to incremental progress.
Right. For sure. Yes. Months and months. And not only I'm going to hand it over to Meeraa and Dena to chime in. The other thing that I think is difficult, and I think I would also love to hear your thoughts, everyone, on this. Systems don't see change. It's like, let's say the leader has changed that behavior 3 out of 5 times. The 2 that's confirming the bias that they do a certain behavior can erase the behavior change they have made. And what do you do? I mean, I think that's really, Michael, what you're saying. We have to keep revisiting, because it's not just the person, it's the person and the system having decided, right? Confirmation bias about behavior. So I love that. Okay. Anything you want to add to this? And I have another question. Okay. Do you recommend, Marley, make sure I do this correctly for this person. Do you recommend we share with our direct reports that we are defending them in front of the executive team because the EC team isn't happy with the direct reports performance? How much do you share about where they stand, how to handle this? Did I get that right, Marley?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So I think
go ahead. Go. Please go for it. Yeah.
Go, Meeraa.
Yeah. Thank you. So I think it is not about the EC team is not happy with our direct reports performance. It is the collective outcome that we have failed to achieve. Right. So that is what I would take the message and then convey, saying, hey, it is not you and I did not do well, but you and I did not achieve this outcome well. So what do we do now to deliver to that outcome? So that's where the focus should be on, not on the individual performance. or even if it is about a specific individual who has not delivered. So it is focused on what is not delivered, right? Like why is that perception on, as opposed to on that person.
What I would take the defending words out of it, because what you're doing is nulling and voiding the feedback. Because what it sounds like the executive team is trying to do is give feedback, and maybe it's digging into what is the actual feedback they're trying to give, and then taking that feedback to bring back to the table, versus what you are or aren't doing. They don't need to know the sausage making in the meeting, but they just need to know what the feedback is and what the performance change, as Meeraa was saying, that you want to make or recommend or come up with together.
Yeah, I agree with that, Dena. I would say there's no need to be a martyr. You know, you don't need to be the person that's saying, "Oh, don't worry, I threw myself on the sword for you. Like I'm protecting you." That's part of the job of being a leader, is that, you know, you are supposed to be that layer that, and you know, I will use the word protect those that are working with you from, you know, maybe the harshness of some of that feedback, but then distill it down to something that's actionable, something that's useful. That's just the reality of it all. I mean, they don't need to know everything that happened during that time. They just need to know what comes next.
Yeah. I'm just thinking about everything that you're saying, and I'm going back to, you know, we center feedback around corrective. We center feedback around, you know, and often I know for the people I interact with, and I know for myself, the corrective feedback, the developmental feedback is the important feedback, right? And yet, I mean, there's been a whole movement around strengths, and that often strengths are really what we need to lean into. I think in one poll I read recently, 41% of people are leaving their jobs because they don't feel their work is appreciated, i.e. positive feedback about what they're doing well. And I know for me, when I'm giving feedback and I'm giving, here's where your strengths are, people are going, yeah, get over the strengths, just tell me, you know. And yet, this is my opinion. I want to hear your opinion. I think that when a leader is in a growth process, it's hard, and we need those reserves. We need the resilience, and the strengths are what can remind us, hey, I can count on myself for this. I know I can lean into this as I'm changing the more difficult things, that teaching them to receive that positive feedback. And Michael, you've said several times, people are uncomfortable with the positive feedback. And I think you're right. And I'm just wondering, what do you think about the positive feedback? How do you help people actually hear it and acknowledge that it's important, and just as important as corrective feedback?
Well, if you don't mind, I'll start with this one as well, because one of the things I tend to do is I don't just give feedback to the individual. I sometimes will go to their leader, or go to the, you know, the people on their team and say, hey, this person did an incredible job. You know, they don't need to be in the room when I tell them that. They don't need to be in the call when I tell them that. But that is part of creating a culture of feedback that's not just doing it for show, but rather you're doing it because you really do want to praise that person's accomplishments.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to, like, when you're giving that positive feedback, or that on the strengths, it's using the same model again. It's like, what do you want to continue doing? What is the exact behavior? So it's not just, you're so fabulous, you're wonderful. And that's what I think sometimes makes people feel uncomfortable, because it's not really meaningful, or they don't understand what, or you're just like trying to butter me up for some reason. What's coming next, you know? But it's being very clear and using the same exact model. And then when we talk about, like, when we roll out the feedback model in our workshops, we talk about you want to give both. Like, there are times when you need to be, so it's part of the culture. You're giving both. Feedback is about both the things that are going well and things that aren't going well, because you don't want to be known as the person who only comes around when there's something bad. But you want to be recognizing the good things, because you want that to continue going forward. And if they don't know that that behavior needs to continue forward, it might go away. So that's how we try to build it into why you want to give that positive feedback as well in the strengths.
Yeah. Meeraa, anything to add there before we wrap?
No, I'm very awkward in receiving positive feedback. So I'm okay, move on. What's next? So I know the structure of start, stop, continue. I think that's a neat framework, can apply for both positive and negative feedback.
Yes. And if we're awkward about it or uncomfortable about it, we're gonna transmit that down the line. So we have to learn how to open our hearts, because it is a very vulnerable thing to be seen in our brilliance, I think. And so the one thing that I would add to this is when you're delivering that positive feedback, it's allow your heart to be open and allow your heart to connect with that individual. Because the more it's connected, people feel your goodness and your well-wishing for them, they'll let it in more. And it is vulnerable because like it's you seeing into their soul and catching them being their best. It's vulnerable. Because we're being open and they're being open. And so it's an uncomfortable yet beautiful moment when we can really see someone in their greatness and get right into them and have them hear it. I call them like love darts, because they really, because they're a wake up.
That's
so
awesome.
I want to add one other thing here, actually, because one of the things that I learned a long time ago too about feedback is many times, because people are afraid of giving feedback, they do what they call a feedback cookie, where it's like you start with the good, then you get
sandwich.
the bad, good again. And the thing about that is that it's not a good way to deliver feedback, because what you're doing is you're diminishing the good stuff and you're also detracting from the bad stuff, the stuff that you do want to see improvements on. So I always think, when you're giving that kind of feedback, when you want to give the good feedback and you want to give the constructive feedback, doing it in a manner that is not just, oh, I'm buttering you up so I can tell you something bad, but then don't worry, I'll build you back up again, because it won't be received the right way.
Right. I love
Absolutely.
that. So I wanna say that what I'm taking away from your brilliance, from all of you, is, I mean, obviously this is important, but it's so important right now because I think, we're both hungry for that connection, hungry for being seen, because if you're a remote workforce, you wonder if even anyone's noticing you. And feedback is a way, both that positive feedback and the, hey, here's what you might do better. It's a way we can see people. It's a way that we can reach in and say, I care about you and I want you to be great. And here are some ways to develop. And so I want to just say that I'm taking away a renewed appreciation from all of your wisdom. And I'm really hoping that those that were here and those that will be listening to this, that you'll get how important feedback is. It, like, great leadership begins and ends with feedback, and being continuously open to feedback, whether you are a CXO at a Fortune 100 company or whether you're a brand new startup with 4 employees. It matters because it helps the organization be better and it helps you be better as a leader. And that's what it's about. You didn't come here to be mediocre or bad. You came here to be great at whatever level you are. And the only way to do that is being open to hearing what your impact is and being open to having feedback. So I'm taking away from this, and I hope you all are too that are listening, like, feedback, and create a normalized, comfortable, hungry, thirsty organization for feedback. And I've watched each of you be very coach-like in the way that you've been delivering and having conversations with people about feedback. And I want to just say, next steps for those that are here with Level Up EQ is to come do our Leader as Coach workshop. We're doing an introductory on May 17th. It's a 90-minute workshop. Please come. There'll be information on our website on how to do that. You can register and learn how to be like these amazing leaders on our panel are, which is coach-like and caring about people and delivering powerful feedback and support in growth. The other thing that I just want to say is we do have our ebook that'll be coming out on Friday. If you are interested in receiving it, you can, I think you actually will get an invitation to download. And that is about how do we engage and retain people now in the workplace as it is after all that we've been through and continue to go through. So thank you so much, Dena, Meeraa, and Michael for your wisdom. So grateful for you. Thank you, audience, for your great questions and kind attention. And until we see you again, thank you so much, and be well and have a beautiful day. Bye.
Thank you.
Take
Thank you.
care.
Bye.
Bye.